Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is called Discerning What is True. I'm live today on YouTube, on Odyssey, and also on Facebook. Going to be reading the last part of what I would call Gerald Massey's work called "The Bible is Not Holy." I just basically say part two. I did this work. I think I read it Tuesday night, and so what I'm going to do is basically what he's got here is a hodgepodge of different areas of different things he's talking about as he ends the book. So this is at what we call page 184 of page 213. And he goes into what I would call different subjects, I guess, because briefly, and then basically starts another subject and talks about it, and then goes into another subject, so to speak. And so it varies, and it will be, he talks about a genuine Gnostic in here. And I don't know how far we get into this particular last part of this particular book, but we'll see what happens today. Um, so thank you for being here. Kind of changed the background here. Wanted to be in a different area of the house, actually. So that's why I'm in a different part. Most people notice is a different background, unlike what my other area is, the house here. So let me get back to the page I want to start here with. And the first thing he's going to talk about here, I think he sees something that doesn't jive, doesn't fit, and it's kind of interesting. This is to deal with what I would call a note to lecture on Paul. It's like, okay, what's the deal here? What's your issue? What is the issue here? And it's briefly only um, just two paragraphs. It's not even that long, but he does want to share something here. I can tell in this book. And so let's see if I can get this thing to work the way I want it to. Let's see if we can go back here a little bit. Bear with me a second here. This thing's supposed to change. Okay. Okay. Let's see. So this is the note to lecture on Paul. Paul is an interesting character, as they would say, and I don't know what to think about him myself. Okay, so to me, it's kind of a jump ball situation. So let's get into reading here. Thank you for being here, like I said earlier. In quoting evidence of the double doctrine ascribed to Paul, I omitted one of the most conclusive illustrations of the fact. We read in Galatians chapter 3, verse 13, quote, Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, Cursed is everyone that hangeth on a tree, end quote. The object of hanging the condemned one on the tree was to make him a curse. But what says the voice of Paul, the Gnostic, in another text, that is in Corinthians chapter 12, verses 3? Verse 3. He's got a question mark there. Quote, No man speaking by the Spirit of God calleth Jesus accursed. And no man can say that Jesus is the Lord but by the Holy Spirit. End quote. That is, the Christ of the Gnostics, or Gnosis, could not become a curse, could not be hung upon a tree, and no Gnostic would say that Jesus was the Kyrios, K-U-R-I-O-S, in capital K, all this is in capital letters, save in the mystical or esoteric sense. Here, the historical and Gnostic doctrines are directly antipodal. This, again, is the teaching of Paul. Another quote, Say not in thy heart, who shall ascend unto heaven? quote, and then it's in parentheses here, that is to bring Christ down, or who shall descend into the abyss? Question mark. Then he has a parentheses again, that is to bring Christ up from the dead. Then he says, the word is nigh thee, in thy mouth and in thy heart, end quote. That is the word as preached by Paul. Then follows the interpolation also as an illustration of the statement made by Clement and Alexandria, that Paul said he would bring the gnosis or hidden wisdom to the brethren in Rome. It should have been shown by me that the teachings of the epistle, that is chapter 1, 23 through 32, is taken almost bodily and repeatedly, nearly verbatim from chapter 14, verses 12 through 31 of the book called Wisdom of Solomon, end quote. So that's the whole section. That's 2 little paragraphs. And so now he joins into another particular subject matter called the Karast, K-A-R-A-S-T, equal Christ or mummy dash type of immortality. The Karast, which I claim to be the Egyptian original of the Greek Christ, was an image of rising, again, a representative of the resurrection. And in speaking of the symbol, I ought to have pointed to the fact that the alleged historical resurrection of Jesus has never yet been found portrayed on the so-called early Christian monuments, including those discovered in the Roman catacombs. But what do we find there in place of the missing fact? The scene of Lazarus being raised from the dead. This is depicted over and over again as the typical resurrection where there is no real one. Christ of Egypt reproduced in Rome like the other mythical types perpetuated there by Gnosis art. As the image is Egyptian, it is probable that the name is so likewise. He's got Las, L-A-S, and then he has or Ras, R-A-S, signifies to be raised up. And Aru, A-R-U, is another name for the mummy type, so that Lazaru or Lazarus, with the Greek terminal, is the Egyptian symbol of resurrection called the Karas, it's K-A-R-A-S-T, or Christ. This typical and pictorial representation of the rising from the dead would become the story of Lazarus in the natural course of humanizing the mythos. So that's, again, one paragraph as far as I see here. Yes, one paragraph. And that's what he talked about here. Then he goes into something here, another particular area he talks about. And this is more lengthy. I tried to find the word in the Wikipedia, even how to pronounce it. And I can't find anything as far as I can say. So maybe it was misspelled or what, I don't know. So the title of this particular area is called Aretort, I guess, A-R-E-T-O-R-T. So he goes on and says, I am sorry to trouble my readers with a matter so personal as the present subject. It has been found out that I am not infallible. So apparently it must be something happening. Like my fellow mortals, I can fall into error. I have to acknowledge and regret a stupid blunder perceived alas, too late, that is, on page 15 of the Historical Jesus and Mythical Christ, also page 419 of volume 2, called Natural Genesis. In comparing with the Egyptian certain Syro-Chaldea and Aramaic, words which have been left untranslated in the Greek text of the New Testament, I include the word Sent, S-E-N-T, end quote. And entirely forgetting that it was English when I compared it with the Egyptian Shen, S-H-E-N-T, quote. A, quote, pool, P-O-O-L, and Samad. See if I get that right. Sorry, not Samad. S-U-N-N-T, quote. A healing bath. The nature of my inadvertent tense is proved in the very next lines by the remark, quote, there is no need to strain a single point for the purpose of making ends meet. It was foolish, but such is the simple fact. And I will not seek to minimize my mistake. Anyone engaged in attacking what he considers the supreme delusion of the Egyptian mind and the crowning error of all time ought to be free from the smallest errors himself. Would that it were possible. For the most, it is sure to be made by the enemy of the least lapse, more especially by those who have been consecrated to the service of falsification. My error drew the attention of Mr. Coleman, that is, and induced him to write an article in the Religious Philosophical Journal of Chicago last October, of which no copy was sent to me by the writer or publisher. To this, my attention has just been called also to a letter by the same writer, which appeared in the same journal dated February 5th, headed, quote, Opinions of Eminent Egyptologists regarding Mr. Massey's alleged Egypto-Christian parallels, end quote. Unfortunately, the letter will necessitate a reply to the previous article. In this letter of the Reverend A.H. Sarah, S-A-Y-C-E, is reported to say of me to Mr. Coleman, quote, many thanks for your very thorough demolition of Mr. Massey's crudities. It is difficult to understand how a man can have the effrontery to put forward such a mass of ignorance and false quotation. You have done a real service to the cause of truth by exposing him so fully. You ask me if I can detect any errors in your essay. Errors are enough on the part of Mr. Massey, but they have all been exposed impartially and mercifully by yourself, end quote. Mr. Coleman continues and quotes the following from, quote, one of the ablest Egyptologists in England, end quote, who is, quote, now connected with the British Museum, which is correct, end quote, of whom he says, owing to the rather personal character of some of his remarks, is thorough better than his name be not published, end quote. So this guy's got a pickle with him. The writer says to Mr. Coleman, you are right in your exposure of Mr. Massey. Some people think him dishonest, and that he is quite conscious of the ridiculous blunders which he publishes. I do not think so after having examined his large book. It is a work which I should have thought could have only been written in Bedlam. No lunatic could possibly write more wild rubbish without the least consciousness of the incredible ignorance displayed throughout. So they're going to lambast him here is what they're going to do. They don't like what he's saying. The man is at once, that's in capital letters, at once an ignoramus of the worst kind, viz., not in the least being aware of his ignorance, and he has the pretension of explaining things which cannot be understood, quote, in brackets, except by trusting other persons, in bracket, without a considerable knowledge of different languages which he does not possess, end quote. If the words have any real relationship to known facts, it seems to me that the Egyptologist who has taken the place of the late Dr. Samuel Birch must be the writer of the letter quoted by Mr. Coleman. I wrote to Mr. Renal stating my inference and asking him to favor me with a denial if he were not the writer. This is Mr. Renal's reply. The underlining is mine. Sir, you are mistaken. This is quote. Sir, you are mistaken in thinking that the extract from Mr. Coleman's letter points undoubtedly to me. There are more persons than one at the museum besides me to whom it might be supposed to point. But whatever indiscretion there may have been till now in the matter, I am not disposed to add to it by answering any questions as to my knowledge of the authorship of the letter to which you refer. I am, sir, your obedient servant P. LePage Renal. End quote. That answer I looked upon as eminent unsatisfactory, and I think my view will be shared by others. Only one person wrote the letter, and this explanation brings at least three under suspicion without identifying or absolving the right one. If Mr. Renal be the writer, instead of clearing himself, he has imitated the ink fish and taken refuge in the cloud which he has cast around his confederators at the museum. I cannot think the reply is calculated to deceive. It contains no denial. However, perhaps the discretion shows too late, maybe not proved to be the better part of valor, but I leave blank for the time I being here, where I have not the absolute right to fill in a name. We have heard the language like this of Mr. and this is left blank before, put in better English. When anything very upsetting has been presented to the world, such damnation is dirt cheap. Also, the time has passed for denunciation to be mistaken for disproof. That is the kind of authority I have already counted on and discounted when I say, quote, they must find it hard to take truth for authority who have so long mistaken authority for truth. End quote. By the by, I may confess to Mr. So-and-so that I escaped from Bedlam many years ago. I would also remind him that the proper name for Bedlam is Bethlehem, a most ancient madhouse in which the patients have been confined for 1,800 years, and that our Bedlam also was once a, quote, religious house, end quote. I am not mad myself, but I am possessed by the conviction that a good many other people are, and that no insanity is quite so virtually as that which dates from the ancient Bedlam. I have already warned my readers that they must expect little help from these Egyptologists and Assyrianologists who are biblicolators first and scholars afterwards. Biblicolators put out the eye of scholarship or causes confirmed Strabism. I admit in the preface to my natural, quote, natural genesis that, quote, as a matter of course, the author will have blunder in manifold details, end quote. At the end of 3 years, I doubt whether I have, but of course, in a work of so fundamental and pioneering a nature, there will be some oversights, crudities, and even graver faults that cannot be avoided in the first edition. Why? 30,000 errors have had to be corrected in the last edition of the, quote, Word of God, end quote. And it does seem at times to be a providential part of the scheme of things that where the truths entirely fail to command attention, first, the errors are sorted to secure some sort of advertisement for the work. In this way, even a Coleman can be turned to account. Madness may be a matter of opinion, but whoever charges me with intent, quote, false quotation, end quote, lies. I spare no time to get at my facts and neglect no available source of knowledge, whether directly open to myself or derivable through the minds of those who are great linguists. As I've also said in my preface, I took the precaution of consulting Dr. Samuel Birch for many years after he had offered, in his own words, to, quote, keep me straight, end quote, as to my facts, attainable from Egyptian records. He answered my questions, gave me advice, discussed varying renderings, read whatever proofs I sent him, and corrected me where he saw I was wrong. I never could understand the interest he took in me and my work. He could have had no sympathy with my real aim and ends. And then it's in brackets here, it says, which are not wholly proclaimed even on my title page, in bracket. Yet he was always ready to enrich my poor means with the treasures of his knowledge, so precious for my purpose, whether by letter or in person, whenever I sought him out among the mummies and or get my verification direct from the monuments, including the hieroglyphic texts and pictures of his own copy of the Book of the Dead. He's got another part here. It says, in a corner found the toys of the old Egyptian boys. And now for Mr. Coleman. He has been trying to discredit my work for over 3 years past. His assumption of superiority is immense and might prove imposing. if his methods of attack were not so vehemently mean. His latest labor in vain has been to try and rear a pyramid on its apex, the sole point of a single fact, which can be sent toppling over with a single kick. Where it suits his purpose, he uses an imperfect report of a lecture so that he may convict me of errors which are not to be found in the book that he seeks to discredit, and industriously essays to damn. In the article referred to, he says, quote, in recent numbers of the London Medium and Daybreak, there has appeared Mr. Gerald Massey's lecture on the, quote, historical Jesus and the mythical Christ, as revised and corrected by the author and is delivered by him in London not long since. In this lecture, which attempts to establish that the Jesus and the disciples of the New Testament had no evidence in the flesh, but were only personifications of Egyptian myths. So this is where the cookie is, he's going to deal with crack. We find a large number of asserted parallels between the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth and certain portions of the Osiris and other myths of Egypt, end quote. The opening paragraph contains two positive, provable falsehoods. The version of my lecture made use of by him was a reprint from an imperfect report in the New Zealand Rationalist, end quote, which was not revised by the author. If it had been, he could only have assumed to know what he asserted without knowing. But it is not true. It is also false that in this lecture or in my book, I try to, quote, establish that Jesus and disciples of the New Testament had no existence in the flesh, but were only personifications of ancient Egyptian myths, end quote, whatever that may mean. On the contrary, I demonstrate the existence of the only possible historical Jesus known to Celsus, C-E-L-S-U-S, to Irenaeus, to the Jews, who allowed that he had 12 disciples whom they call the, quote, 12 God Runagates. What I do also demonstrate is that the mythical 12 were the fathers of Har Khuti. I'll spell this for you, Har-Khuti in Egypt ages earlier. So what he's doing is saying he's going back to the past. They pull this information. Anyway, let me take a break here real quick. What I do also demonstrate is that the mythical 12 were the fathers of Har Khuti in Egypt ages earlier. I said that earlier, sorry. This is a prime specimen of his mode of working and one it is well to keep in mind all along. This is the mode of demolition which Professor Sayre endorses, warrants, and glorifies, and Mr. And he doesn't tell the name, declares to be quite right. Again, I have used the Hebrew word natural Genesis, that is in number 2419, on which our learned Hebrews remarks, quote, this asserted Hebrew word shalom is a fabrication. There is no such Hebrew word in existence as shalom, S-H-I-L-O-A-M. So he spelled this out for him in unpointed Hebrew. And then he says shalom, it's S-H, then it has a capital L-O-M, end quote. To identify Salem or Shalom with Salom in Hebrew, the letter M was required. There being no M in the correct word Shylock, I'm just pronouncing what I think it is, S-H-I-L-O-A-C-H. Mr. Massey manufactured a Hebrew word and printed it in Hebrew letters as if to deceive the very elect, end quote. Now look at that for a lie, with no room left for the least little wiggle out of it. As Mr. Coleman obviously knows nothing of Hebrew beyond the names of letters, perhaps Mr. Sayre or Mr. So-and-so will look it out for him in Paris at page 1388, column 2, where the word appears with the meaning of well, W-E-L-L, in health. Basically, well is a quote. And then the Rotterdam simply says in health, and on page 1376, column 1, where it means peace. It is used for the Prince of Peace in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. At first says shalom is cognate with and it goes again, says SHLOM. It's quite impossible that Mr. Sayre should not have known this at the time he gave his sanction to Mr. Coleman falsehoods and contaminated effortlessly. And was cruel not to arrest him as he was cattering around in this wild way instead of tickling the poor creature's vanity with insincere applause. The lie and libel were so unnecessary that I am compelled to regret the woman wasted them pure malignantly. When I say the quote pool of peace is Salem or Shalom in Hebrew, I do not say that it is the pool of Shalom. I am only rendering the word peace. And as Shalom means peace, and Salem means peace. I use the alternate of Salem or Shalom, both in brackets here, quotes. I knew the two words were spelled differently, and that Shalom may be spelled S-H-A-L-O-M. I also knew that they were identical in meaning. Moreover, the pool of the waters that flow softly is a form of the pool of peace. Not that either of these were involved or all necessary to be my argument when I said, quote, the pool of peace is in Hebrew Salem or Shalom. I am speaking of the mythical pool, which is in Egypt, which in Egyptian is the pool of help, H-E-P-T, or peace, not the topographical pool of Salom. I was only concerned with the identity of the mythical original, which had various localizations in different lands, Judea included. Mr. Coleman runs a long rigmarole about the goddesses Na, N-U, and the place Anna, A-N-N-U, quote, in which he flounders in the bottomless bog of his own helpless ignorance, past all pulling out by those who have taken him by the hand, viz. Monsieur Sayre, and stops. He who enters this domain so unprepared and unequipped as Mr. Coleman must be a poor damn fool. I could have pitied the impotency, but for his inevitable conceit and aggressive insolence. Because I use the word an, A-N, and Anna, Anu, as synonyms. This great Egyptologist asserts that I identified the lady An, A-N, with the goddess Nun, N-U, to form the word Anu, as the monkey exclaims when he saw the elephant taking in water at such a rate. Quote, to drink with the tail is immense. An and Anu are simply Egyptian variants of one word, different spellings of the same word are the results of familiarity with matters upon which my corrector is so utterly ignorant that he looks upon and denounces the variants in Egyptian spelling as my distortion of Egyptian names and sapling suggests that, quote, there always appears to be an object, end quote, in my changes, He thinks the, quote, lady with the long hair, end quote, is Tafu, and not the goddess Nun, as I had inferred, partly because the ritual says, quote, the hair of the Osiris is in the shape of that Nun in you. That's in chapter 62. And partly because of the Osiris ascends to heaven, or Nun with his long hair down to his shoulders. Either way, it matters very little. What I do regret is that I could not have had the advantage of knowing what Mr. Coleman thinks about the Egyptian mythology before writing my book. The opinion of such an event, suspension of such an expert on the most profoundly illusions and problematically sayings, might have seriously modified the result. He further charged me with having got certain goddesses mixed up. It being the mission to teach me how to separate them once more and distinguish between them individually. Here he tries to turn his ignorance to account by taking advantage of the readers, and producing the impression that the ignorance is mine. He throws dust in the eyes of others and then says it was I who did it, and Mr. Sayre is a cloud of it, swears it to me. I may admit that this parallel of the woman at the well, which is but 1 out of 50, is the weakest one, but it is enough for my purpose to show that the Osiris or Osiriphi, that is the being identifying character, appears at the well or pool of peace, that he claims to be the well and personates the water, that the source of this water of life given to the Son is the Father, that a well or flow of the water comes out of Osiris to him, that the well of this water comes through him. This is see John chapter 8, chapter 7, 38, and chapter 4, verse 14, that he washes in the pool of peace, end quote, where the Osirified are made pure or healed, where the, quote, certain times, end quote, as I have called them, because the seasons for healings are dual in the ritual, are detailed thus, quote, the gods of the pure waters are there on the 4th hour of the night and the 8th hour of the day, saying, quote, pass away hence, end quote, to him who has been cured or healed. Here's a noticeable that is still continued process of eliminating that which looks too mythical. This passage containing the angel descending to trouble the water and turn them into a pond of healing has been dropped from the latest revised version of John's Gospel. In converting the original myths into later history, this process of picking the owner's name or sign from stolen goods has gone on from the first and is yet not ended. I do not say or suppose anything so simple as the writer of John's Gospel was copying from some, quote, variant and obscure chapter in ancient Egyptian papyrus, end quote. That is Mr. Coleman's foolish way of putting it, I should say. That was not exactly the way in which the Osirian legend got literalized in Rome. If it had been preserved and continued as mythos, it could not have reappeared and appeared under the guise of historical Christianity. The matter had to be manipulated, converted, assimilated, in which process the original features have been somewhat defaced. This has to be allowed for in judging of my parallels, comparison, and interpretations. There must, of necessity, be a wide gulf between any one of who accepts the gospel history as pure matter of fact, and one who treats it as mainly mythical. The two can only talk to different classes of mind, separated for the time being by that gulf, across which they can hardly hear each other speak. But perhaps the most perfect of all my critics' manifold errors and monstrous blunders is this. He writes a long essay in 6 columns to defend a passage in the Johannes Gospel against my mythical interpretation with the intention of demonstrating the, quote, stupendous display of ignorance and absurdity, end quote, which he finds in my volumes. He fights tooth and nail on behalf of the historical interpretation against the mythical. His one line of argument, his raison d'etre, all through is that the events under review, the woman at the well, Christ who drinks there, and other circumstances are historical. And yet, in the opening parallel paragraph of his article, he has started with saying, quote, it's significant that most of these so-called New Testament parallels are derived from the 4th Gospel, popularly ascribed to John. Every competent biblicist knows that the account of Jesus and his teachings given in John's Gospel differs widely from those given in the first 3 Gospels. And there is no reasonable doubt in the light of historical, critical, biblical science that while large portions of the latter are genuinely historical, the Gospel of John as a whole is unhistorical or mythical, end quote. Good God, the man is here throwing away the child with the water it was washed in. If this be so, and as I demonstrate, the mythical gospel was first, no matter how late it appeared in the canonic gospel ascribed to John. The supposed history of the synoptics goes to the ground. Where is the sanity in supposing that the mythical matter of John's gospel is the result of tattooing Egyptian fables all over the face of historical fact, as previously portrayed by the synoptics, and disfiguring the human features past all recognition. The Christ of John is indefinitely divine. That is first. The final phase looks definitely historical. That is how the mythological was humanized. The myth makers were fabulous, but not the forgers of fact. The forgers are they who converted the fable into historical fact. Mr. Coleman says only just what I say and show on behalf of the mythos, but what then was the sense, and where was the sanity in laboring to prove it to be historically bit by bit, when as a whole it is entirely unhistorical and mythical? Yes, Monsieur Sayre, and assure Mr. Coleman with their compliments that he is right. I fancy some of my readers will suspect that he is not quite. And this is what it is to be demolished. This is doing a, quote, real service to the cause of truth, end quote. So says the Reverend Mr. Sayre, and he is a authority. Mr. Coleman charges me with limiting my quotations from the Egyptian ritual to Dr. Birch's version of the, quote, very corrupt Turin text, Turin text, end quote, as it were a authority respecting the text, TESTS, and then of misquoting the text to establish my parallel, whereas my slightly departure from the text in Bunsen, B-U-N-S-E-N, are the result of various emendations or corrections made by the Egyptologists, such as Renoul, including Dr. Birch himself, to whom I took them for his final opinion, and with whom I have gone over text after text for that purpose. I neglected no available source of knowledge early or late. Also regarding condensing and certain passages, I wrote with the whole matter of the mythos in mind and had the ritual well nigh by heart, which is to be an enormous disadvantage when judged by Mr. Coleman. In denouncing the corrupt Turin text, quote, he is merely, quote, monkeying around, end quote, by quoting the words of Mr. Renoul, that is in the Hibbert, Hibbert lectures at page 177. He consistently omits the rest of the sentence. Mr. Renoul, like Mr. Narville, is an expert in textual and verbal criticism, and it is he who says on the same page, quote, Dr. Birch's translation, though made about 30 years ago, became before some of the most important discoveries of the full meaning of words, may still be considered extremely exact as a rendering of the corrupt Turin text, and to the Englishman gives nearly a correct an impression of the original as the text itself would do to an Egyptian who had not been carefully taught the mysteries of his religion, end quote. Mr. Coleman's methods, however, is the correct one for the defender of the great superstition to adopt. And if he were assessed by the spirit of some fanatic Spanish monk, one of those who urged on the Mexican massacres, dead and damned ages since for his bigotry and cruelty, and reincarnated to continue the old battle against truth, he could not have more cleverly stuck the track of the Jesuit. It is what the Christians in all ages have done to get rid of, discredit, and mystify the pre-Christian evidence of the mythical origins. Only he lacks the requisite knowledge for doing the work. Nor is this a matter of what we call mere textual interpretation, and I am calmly confident that no mere verbal changes will invalidate the fundamental facts. The true doctrines, the identified mythology found in the versions of Birch, Lefsu, and Naville. On the contrary, the closest the inspection made by men of insight, the more will any interpretation of the vastest number of facts ever yet collected be corroborated. Mr. Coleman has been soliciting certificates. I will give him one written on a label bound to last and stick like a pitch plaster. It is my recognition of his claims to be and this is what he's got here, the genuine Gnostic. He calls to Europe, high and low, and all the Americas. Quote, that is the man who does not know. I am the man who does, end quote. The other join in chorus, oh, they made him brain bee-boo. They made his brain bee-boo. Buzz, B Buzz. You you are right, dear friend. He does not know. You are the man who does. End quote. For personal knowledge of him and the imposture of his pretenses, I know him to be incompetent to discuss matters of Egyptology. He is not an authority in any department of literature and has not his soul beyond the making of fly dirts on the windows to obstruct the light of or violating the privacy of letters so foolishly entrusted to him and set himself up as a critic and a corrector, mentor and censor, advocate, judge, and jury, all is one. He has greatly mistaken his vocation. If he must pose as a man of letters and assemblies, he should have been a printer reader, allowed once a week to carry a typical banner at the tail of a Lycum procession on Sunday. He may pass for one of the learned among us those who know no better in the realm of the blind. The one-eyed man is a king. He shows some cleverness in writing about what he does not understand, where he is not likely to be brought to book. But he is no more capable of judging or qualifying to give a verdict in a matter like this than the weavet that worms its way through one of Turner's canvases is fitted to pass an opinion on the picture. He has irritating itch for recognition or notoriety, but has shown no sign of possessing or being possessed by the genuine passion for truth. Like an insipid Herodias or Giotto, the fellow who culminated as a fool, gone insane with vanity, he would do anything to be talked about or written to, even commit Massey crap if he were only able. End quote. Never did any writer known to me put forth such strenuous or futile efforts to lift himself up by his own shirt collar and add a cubit to his stature in the eyes of the lookers on. From the beginning to the end, his attempts, his aim and object, the total drift of all his appreciation is to belittle my work and make himself look large to his readers, though a mist of his own making. A chief part of his criticism consists in proclaiming that he does not see. I never said he did or could. Nelson at Copenhagen put up the glass to his one blind eye, and could not perceive the signal flying. Collins puts his glass to two, with the same result of not seeing. I've had to congratulate him on writing to me to set him right on the subject of astronomy before he puts his foot into on a matter most fundamentally important to my subject, the ignorance shown by his questions being astounding. With all native imprudence, he has asserted he's asserted in brackets in the Religio Philosophical Journal, end quote, in brackets, the name of Jesus Christ was unknown until the middle of the first century AD. This in brackets again, cf. the second book of Ezra, Esdras, a pre-Christian book of the secret wisdom, in brackets. In the same journal, he classed Baron Gul as being on my side in opposition to all other writers on the subject of Jehoshua ben Pandura, and entirely overlooked the fact that although Baron Gul used the same Talmud material as myself, his conclusions were totally antithetical to mine, and that he remains as orthodox to today as were his conclusions then. Now Mr. Coleman may pass with his certificates. There is an American story of a dog who ran after a wolf, fast and furious at first, but before the race was over, the dog was seen to be flying still faster. And then you got a quote here, a quote, Lita bit in front of the wolf, end quote. Mr. Coleman is still not authority and no reputation to lose, but his private backers have, and they have committed the unpardonable sin against scholarship of endorsing and justifying false statements made against me by Mr. Coleman without taking the trouble to test the truth of his association or to verify the alleged facts for themselves. They were so ready to make a mountain of a underground worker, Little Hill. They were so eager to have me knifed that they had warrant a blade which was treacherously limp and slender. Mr. Sayre, marvels at my effrontery in making assertions, some of which Mr. Coleman has so falsely put into my mouth, and then charges me with, quote, false quotation, end quote. And he calls Mr. Coleman performance a, quote, very thorough demolition, end quote, and a, quote, real service to the cause of truth, end quote. He rejoices over what he terms a impartial and merciless exposure. To my thinking, the professor is rather Uriah Heepishness, thankful for exceedingly small mercies, and says grace to a miserable meal. Mr. So-and-so vouches for the fact that his correspondence is, quote, quite right, and it appears that neither of them know better, or else their vision was overloaded with the bile of a bitter bigotry. Either way, I warn my American friends that Mr. So-and-so has made use of the official stamp, quote, the hallmark, so to say, of the British Museum to pass off spurious wares upon unsuspecting people in the United States. And I fancy that for all lovers of truth, justice, and fair play, I have so far demonstrated the congenial incompetency of my critics to sit in judgment on my work. It really makes one ashamed of scholarship to think of two reputed agent scholars backing by taking shelter behind a pretender to knowledge like Mr. Coleman to discredit me and condemn my work instead of handling the matter for themselves. My publisher tells me they sent a copy of the work called Natural Genesis to Mr. Sayre over 3 years ago. I have not heard that he attempted to expose my massive ignorance and false quotation, dispute my facts, refute my interpretation, or controvert my conclusions. True, he is not an Egyptologist, not a master of mythology, but that is no excuse nor justification for the conduct which I resent. It only serves as a cause for all the severe condemnation. Of course, is in writing a letter he might have claimed privacy for his opinions, but cannot plead that privilege now the letter is made public. The other writer, whom I told to be Mr. Rao, that is pro tem, is a professor, Egyptologist, a good grammarian, an expert in textual criticism. I am devoted student of his writings in common with those of other Egyptologists, but I never could think highly of the insight or range of vision to a mind like his in a case like mine. Found his acquaintanceship with the largest mass of facts, the widest and truest generalizations based on the facts, or the subtlest interpretations of them will only look like a departure away from and going beyond the facts as limited for him. I have dived deeply, and it fails to see the ocean hath its due profundity. You may transcribe texts and decipher with inscriptions, but with the light shut out all round by non-applications of the comparative method and from lack of illumination within, you cannot touch the Egyptian origin in mythology or language, time or space, or interpret the mystery of Egypt to her own forgotten self. Every day, discoveries are proving how limited has been the outlook, how non-evolutionary and untrue the interpretation of Egyptologists concerning the past of that people, and the latest discoveries made have swept away many of the mental landmarks and effaced the limits of Egyptologists like Mr. Renal, who have only just blazed the various surface of the subject, but I claim that every fresh fact made known of late years as in favor of my interpretation. In England, they have been too long the victims of the Hebrew and Indo-Germanic delusions respecting the beginning. Mr. Renal has declared in the Hilbert Lectures, page 243, that, quote, neither Hebrews nor Greeks borrowed any of their ideas from Egypt, end quote. See Herodias, Plato, Plutarch, Diodorus, Siculus, and others. He thinks the, quote, mythology symbolism, end quote, of Egypt arose from, quote, varieties of metaphorical language, end quote, which, quote, reached upon thought, end quote, and, quote, attained the mystery. Ibid, page 237, followed by Max Muller. He says, quote, mythology, we know, is the disease which springs up at a particular stage of human culture, end quote. That's from, again, from the same work, page 251. Nonsense. 'Tis but a dream of the metaphysical theorists to suppose that mythology is a disease of language or anything else except his own brain. Mythology was a primitive mode of thinking, the early thought, the beginning of its sign language being earlier than words. It remains the repository of man's most ancient science. And truly interpreted once more, it is destined to be the death of all those false theologies to which it has unwittingly given birth. He has said in page 170, it is perhaps hopeless to expect that the Egyptian legends allude to in the quote Book of the Dead end quote will be recovered. My claim is to have recovered them by application of the comparative process to a worldwide range of mythology, and it will be easier to denounce the audacity as lunatic than to prove the right to make that claim. I do not pretend, and I do not explain. He is one, and I do explain, I should say. He is one of those critics who suspect error in what they do not understand. The father God Seth in one phase of character is the earth, but when Seth is called the mother, Mr. Renown suspects an error in the text. It is only the mother who can bring forth. Hence, we find the back as Seth opens to bring forth. In his offhand way of damning by denunciation, a old friend of mine, Mr. McLennan, whose quote name Mr. Renown misspells twice over, once as McLennan and in the other text page, but anyway, page 30, and once as a McLennan is the net index. He asserts that the quote representation, quote, made, end quote, and the zodiac at Denderach were, quote, not anterior to the Christian era or Roman domination. They were borrowed from the Greeks and were entirely unknown to the Egyptians, end quote. Again, that's from page 30. Whereas the inscription found at Denderach states that the temple had been restored in accordance with a plan discovered in the writings of Khufu, while these chief celestial types portrayed all over the planisphere proved themselves to be solely Egyptian. When I pointed out the passage to Dr. Birch, he said, certainly, quote, the types in the planisphere are not Greek. Renown should have done as the artist did who gave the Greek on one side, the Egyptian on the other, end quote. All that he was warranted in saying is that the mythological types, such as Typhon, Sut, Isis, Horus, Seth, Shu, and Tefnut, and the rest of those that never were Greek, had been reproduced as a latter period by Greco-Egyptian artists with a few modernizations. If he intended to distinguish between the zodiacal and extra-zodiacal signs of the planisphere, he should have said so. But of the 12 signs, the Virgin is Isis, and the Sagittarius is composed of Shu and Tefnut. He must have known, however, that when Depus and McLennan spoke of the zodiac of Denderach as being ancient, they meant the planisphere and were not distinguishing the one set of signs from the other. Rays of light from the newest dawn would have no quickening influence to such as are mentally bound and doomed till death to remain the representation of an inspiring system of thought. The resurrection of Egypt has brought forth a spectacle that will frighten historical Christianity to death, or haunt the minds of men till they lose their unworthy fears and listen like truth lovers to the message which she brings to them from the grave. What says Professor Mahaffey? After getting a glimpse of the ghost and finding that the dead language has come to life again, he admits that, quote, every great and fruitful idea, end quote, theological conception, quote, end quote, religious and moral doctrine, now called Christian, were also Egyptian, but he says, quote, I recoil from opening this great subject now. It is enough to have lifted the veil and shown the scene of many a future conflict, end quote. I am not recoiled. The odium of opening this great subject now is mine. I am selected for the honor of receiving not the civil wealth for a crown or reward, but the first blows of the bludgeon on the head from those who raise the howl of insanity. Quote, you will win at last, end quote, says Captain Burton. Quote, but at last generally comes too late, end quote. Well, I don't know. The train I ride and travels with increasing speed. For the present, I have to ask my indiscriminating assailant to assume that responsibility to which he is committed by Mr. Coleman and produces the evidence for his accusations. He says he has examined my work. Now let him cross-examine me. I am scarcely mad or quintessozodia enough to think he will, but should he do so, I will undertake the printing of his exposure to the extent of 50 pages, the size of the present pamphlet. I mean business, you mean. I court honest criticism and welcome genuine correction. I do not mind being misunderstood, but to resent misrepresentation. I'm in search of realities myself and have no tolerance for men or things in masks. I try to follow truth. That's what a capital T here also. I try to follow truth with a capital T, like the old Egyptians, my masters, with all the force of sincerity, all the fervity of faith. This is comparatively easy nowadays when bonfires are no longer made of man or books, and the penalties are very slight, I should say. A loaf or two of bread, the less. A greeting here or there a greeting here or there will an offensive epithet, a rotten egg or dead cat, are things to be smiled at when we remember our forerunners that were her lovers from old, who beat out a pathway for us through all the long dark night of the past, and lit it with unlimited rows of their burning bodies, each turned into flaming torch for truth. Quote from Gerald Massey. Let's see, a correspondent writes, I am reading this extravagant, quote, 7 souls lecture and have been able to follow you as far as the following statement, whereat I stick. I am compelled to trouble you for an explanation. You say quote, the Roman Caesar, the hairy and pubicy or anointed one, was a impersonation of this supreme soul. He happens to be the 8th by name in Octavius, end quote. This looks like converting history into typology. Whatever the root significance of the term Caesar may be, was it not the historical Jewish Caesar who really made, i.e., signalized it by his deeds? The name subsequently becoming a complimentary title assumed by the emperors who were supposed each in turn to reflect the luster of the great Julius, end quote. No, but this may serve as a useful illustration of the historical versus the mythical view of the Christ. I fear, however, that this is a failing of mine to make too many passing allusions and use too few words where explanation may be most needed. I mean the Caesar, in brackets, of whom, in the case of Julius, the Roman legends relate that he was born with a very long hair, like the long hair Horus or the long hair Christ, in brackets, had a mythical origin and bore a title that was typical. Historical rulers were invested with divinity in this way and made into mundane representations of the gods. It has been my work to trace such origins on various lines of research. These mythical origins are manifold. They can only be distinguished and determined by knowing their genesis in natural phenomenon. In the present interest, I suggest or claim that the Caesar, as well as the Ra, the Repa, the Buddha, or the Christ, was a titular representative of the 8, the total and eternal soul. Mythical, the reborn son, S-U-N. Mystical, the reborn spirit or glorified ghost of man. And here's the last part. Here's part of us see here. Natural Genesis at the British Museum. Many inquirers have asked me why the natural Genesis, in quotes, is not in the British Museum. This question I could not understand, but a friend has verified for me the reeling room. Doubtless it is to be got in some other way, known only to be initiated. But these would-be readers during 3 years past were simply enough to suppose that the second part of 1 and the same work would be entered along with the first part and having been published in 1883. Let's see how much is on this thing here, real quick. Yeah, it's been an hour long. So we're going to stop here at this point, and there is some more here. You can see that Massey was pretty upset, and probably rightfully so. Basically, we have the same type of people today. Sometimes as critics, just want to be, just want to basically get their own name out there, being a critic. So anyway, thank you for being here. Again, this is The Bible is Not Holy. This is part 2 by Gerald Massey. I didn't really mean to go through all this, but I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of what people deal with when people are trying to do the right thing, supposedly, and you have these people, dogs, that basically just want the bones at you, so to speak. So we're going to end right now. Thank you for listening. Again, this is a good explanation. We'll probably finish the other part of it in a little bit here. Thank you. Have a good night.